Look closely at these mice. The shape is unmistakably the Razer Viper. They have the exact same silhouette, the exact same curves. And that's the Logitech Superlight shape. There's no denying it. These aren't openly advertised as clone mice, but everyone knows what's going on. If you stripped away the logos and painted them all the same color, you would have an incredibly hard time telling them apart from the original. But that's of course by design. It's no coincidence that these mice have almost identical shapes. Brands like Mchos, ATK or Attack Shark see which shapes work on the market and then create mice with very similar, if not identical shapes. But what makes these mice so intriguing is that they usually cost a fraction of the mouse they are copying. And with the prices of flagship mice going through the roof, buying a cheaper clone sounds pretty tempting, I gotta say. So we got 2 clones each for arguably the most popular shapes on the entire mouse market. The Logitech Superlight shape, the Razer Viper shape, and the legendary Viper Mini shape. The question really is though, are these just cheap imitations of the real deal that look the part but have worse components and disappointing performance? Or are these genuinely good mice? Let's start with the Viper clones. I went with the Mchos K7 Ultra and the ATK X1 V2 Ultimate, as these look the most promising. But there are boatloads of Viper clones, and you can definitely find much cheaper ones out there. However, both ATK and Mchos are actually pretty established brands in the mouse market, so I think these are some of the most interesting candidates that actually have a good chance of keeping up with the Viper. And still, these cost roughly half of what the Viper V4 Pro goes for. And the spec sheets of these clones look very promising, especially for the money. But yeah, the spec sheet only tells you so much about quality and performance. So let's check the quality aspect first, and let's actually do a little blind test. I'm gonna squeeze these mice much harder than I ever would in game. So yeah, have a listen for creaking sounds. So which one of these do you think is the Viper V4 Pro and which ones are the cheap clones? Okay, here's the reveal. The Viper V4 was sample A. And honestly, I think even when you squeeze the hell out of these mice, all 3 feel incredibly similar. And I don't know about you, but I usually don't grip my mouse like my life depends on it, so all feel solid enough really. And when it comes to the buttons, I actually slightly prefer how the clicks sound and feel on the clone mice. All have optical switches, but the Viper V4 has a bit of a piercing, metallic click sound. So what about the performance then? Under the hood, the Mchos and the ATK are rocking a version of the PixArt 3950 sensor, which is pretty high tier. And I really can't say anything bad about the tracking performance. I honestly don't even notice a difference to Razer's focus sensor. Also, both clones support wireless 8K polling, just like Razer. And it actually works flawlessly. They have no trouble reaching a clean 8K wireless report rate. The days where you have to buy a premium flagship mouse to get stable wireless connection with high polling rates are long over. And it's a similar story when it comes to click latency. Here are the results. The latency of both the Viper V4 Pro as well as the ATK are excellent. But really all these latency numbers are good. I don't think you can feel a latency difference between these mice in game. I certainly can't. So what exactly are you paying an extra like $80 for when you buy the real Viper V4 Pro? Razer's biggest advantage here really is the weight of just 49 grams. The clones sit around 59 grams. Yeah, it's not a huge difference, but I gotta say, while 10 grams doesn't sound like much, it's noticeable in game. So if the price difference wasn't there, I'd gravitate towards the Viper. But besides the weight, there are actually some other differences that are somewhat noticeable in game. See, both the clones copied the shape of the Viper almost perfectly. The placement of the side buttons, though, is slightly different, especially on the ATK. But what makes a bigger difference is that the sensor is not in the exact same position. Both Mchos and ATK got close to Razer's sensor position. MChos put the sensor a bit more towards the front of the mouse, but ADK placed the sensor a bit further back, which I'm personally not a fan of. Because of that one tiny detail, the MChos actually feels better in game to me, and also a bit closer to the Viper. So it's my favorite of the two. And honestly, it feels shockingly close to the Viper in game. Definitely more like the Viper V3 Pro, and not like the V4 because of the weight difference. But yeah, when you think about that this mouse goes for like $80, the V3 costs roughly $130, and the V4 roughly $160, I think the value proposition is pretty good. Alright, let's pause for a moment to talk about the sponsor of this segment, Sihu and the new Doro C300 Pro V2 ergonomic chair. If you're working, editing or gaming for hours on end, you're rarely just sitting still. You lean forward during an intense match or kick back in between rounds. But a lot of standard chairs get uncomfortable the moment you shift your weight. The C300 Pro V2 was designed to fix that with its full body adaptive support. It uses the Dynacore system that adapts to your movements in real time, keeping your whole body supported as you move. This is paired with a SynchroFlex backrest, which automatically adapts to your spine the second you sit down. It provides a personalized fit for any body type and follows your back while you recline. For targeted lower back support, the C300 Pro V2 features an adjustable dynamic lumbar support system. As you lean back, the lumbar support slides down with you, making sure your lower back stays fully supported. And the 8D armrests adjust in pretty much every direction you can imagine. You can also flip them up to support your elbows for handheld gaming. To top it off, the 3D headrest supports your neck in all directions when you're kicking back. If you're a programmer, video editor, gamer, or just working from home, your back deserves a proper chair. Check out the Sihu Doro C300 Pro V2 using the link in the video description. Now back to the video. So what about the other mouse shape that's extremely popular? The Logitech Superlight shape. This time we have the Attack Shark X8 and again MChos with the A7 V2 Ultra. And these copy Logitech's shape and button placement almost perfectly. Even the weight is almost identical, which honestly is almost a bit disappointing. Seeing the other mice in Attack Shark's and MChos' lineup, I really think they could have done better and made these a bit lighter than the Logitech even. But maybe they specifically wanted to hit the same weight as closely as possible, I don't know. When it comes to the sensor placement, MChos copied the sensor position almost exactly, and Attack Shark got very close too. The X8 has the sensor ever so slightly farther back, really not much, it's maybe like a millimeter. Now, given how similar these are, it's really no surprise that both of these feel very, very similar to the Logitech in-game. Again, shape and weight are spot on, but I lean towards the MChos because of the slightly more accurate sensor position, and I like the MChos web interface a bit more. Really though, both are great alternatives and make it really hard to justify spending like $150 plus on a Logitech mouse. Funnily enough, Logitech doesn't even have a web interface for their mice. Like with all these clone mice, you just gotta open your browser, tweak your settings, and you're good to go. No need to download anything. But Logitech for some reason still wants you to download G-Hub. I'm glad there's now the onboard memory manager that you can use as a lightweight alternative to G-Hub, but that's still a download. Honestly, if these Chinese clone mice can have a nice web interface at a fraction of a price, I don't see a reason why Logitech couldn't. But let's address the elephant in the room. The mouse that I have here from Logitech is actually the new Super Strike and not the Superlight. The Super Strike has the same shape and nearly identical weight, but it has Logitech's new inductive trigger system. So these clones aren't really clones of the Super Strike, but rather of the Superlight. And because they don't have the inductive trigger system, the Super Strike can have a slight latency advantage, at least if you use the most sensitive actuation point on the Logitech. But realistically, the clones play in a very similar league when it comes to click latency. So yeah, if you had an eye on the regular Superlight, I honestly don't think it makes a lot of sense to spend more than double the money for the Logitech logo essentially. But these clones don't copy Logitech's new trigger system, at least not yet, so it's a bit of a different story with the Super Strike. If you really want this new trigger system for whatever reason, you just gotta spend a bit more for the original thing, or wait until the trigger system gets copied as well, which will probably happen soon enough anyway. But yeah, getting the newest cutting-edge tech can actually be a valid reason not to buy a clone. But you know, sometimes it's actually the clones that offer something you can't get from the original brand. I mean, let's be real, most people probably buy a clone mouse for one reason only: saving money. But that might not be the motivation behind getting one of these mice. See, these two mice have almost exactly the same shape as the legendary Razer Viper Mini. So these are not really about saving money. See, Razer simply doesn't make a standard wireless version of the Viper Mini, at least no version that normal people could buy. They made the wireless Viper Mini Signature Edition a while ago, which had an MSRP of about $280. And thanks to its highly limited availability, people are still selling them for absurd prices online. So in this case, it's not really about saving a few dollars. Buying a clone is the only sane option here. And this is where clones also get really interesting, because some companies are actually putting their own spin on things instead of just blindly copying. Take the Portage Trinity for instance. It has the shape of the Viper Mini, but it features an adjustable sensor position, which the real Viper Mini definitely doesn't have. And this actually adds value instead of just being a simple copycat. Sure, this definitely is a more expensive mouse than your typical run-of-the-mill clone, but I gotta say, I respect when these brands try to put their own spin on it, rather than just copying what's already out there. You could argue that even the ADK F1 falls under that same category too. It has a standard solid shell, which arguably is an improvement over the skeleton-style shell of the Viper Mini Signature Edition. And despite that completely solid shell, the ADK still manages to be a few grams lighter, coming in at an extremely impressive 40 grams. I do wish though ADK had changed one more thing about the original. According to Elo Shapes, ADK placed their sensor in the exact same spot as the Razer original, which I personally think is way too far back. On the Portage Trinity, I can slide the sensor much further to the front, and this feels so much better in game. But yeah, sensor position preferences aside, both are great mice. And the latency is top-notch as well, in case you were wondering. For obvious reasons, I unfortunately don't have a Viper Mini Signature Edition to compare them with, but I'm pretty confident that these two could keep up no problem. Mice like these really show that clone mice aren't just about saving money. They can also fill in the gaps in the market. But even if a mouse doesn't add anything new to the market and just copies the shape of a more expensive mouse at a cheaper price, I believe this still can be a good thing, as this makes popular mouse shapes more accessible to more people. You know, people always say shape is king for a reason. The shape is extremely important for how you perform with a mouse. So having more options for the same shape is a good thing. And I also think this is a very different story than clone keyboards, for instance. If a company just puts a useless strap on the side of their keyboard and copies the case design of the Wu-Tang 60HE, they're just ripping off the style and design to make their keyboard look like a more expensive product. But with mice, the shape is such an important part of the functionality. So this really isn't about getting a mouse that looks like a more expensive mouse. Okay, some brands take the cloning thing a bit too far, but as I see it, clone mice aren't about looking expensive. They're really about getting more options for the mouse shape that works for you. Thanks for watching, bis zum nächsten Video.